Hi, I'm Michael Aboud, founder and chief executive officer of TetherView. Welcome to Controlling IT Chaos, a podcast where we bring together business leaders and cybersecurity experts to explore the evolving world of cyber attacks and the cutting edge solutions companies and governments are using to protect their networks. This podcast series is brought to you by Columbia University's Center for Technology Management, and it's a privilege to be joined by my good friend and co-host Tom Cowan, who's the Associate Director of Columbia's Center for Technology Management, or CTM, as we call it for short. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Ari Mahairas. Ari is with SL Green. He's the Director of Security and Life Safety. He oversees all security, technology systems, and safety functions for SL Green's portfolios. Prior to joining SL Green, Ari spent 23 years at the FBI, where he retired as Special Agent in charge of FBI's New York's Counterintelligence and Cyber Division. Tom, we're excited to get started. Let me hand it off to you.
So it's actually not fair because all three of us are friends and have been for a while now. So this is a little bit of an unfair podcast because Ari is a close friend. Although we haven't seen each other in person, Ari, probably in what? I'm going to say 3 or 4 years now, maybe.
At least 3 years. So this is more of a reunion than it is a podcast.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Well, it's great to see you. It's really, really great to see you. So tell us, other than the fact that, you and I have the most stylish haircuts around, tell us a little bit about what you're working on these days, because you had such a fascinating career when you were in the government service. And now you flipped out of government service and you're working in the real estate area. So tell everybody what you're up to there and what the big things you're working on these days are.
Well, first and foremost, thank you to both Michael and yourself for inviting me to your podcast. And like I said, I truly mean it when I say this is a reunion. And so it's a pleasure to be here and join you guys today. Interestingly enough, the experience that I had in the Bureau, the 20 plus years, and all the different programs that I was able to touch on, all those lessons, all those experiences, all those different strategies that I've learned over the years, thankfully, I'm able to apply in my current role in the commercial real estate sector. And so many of the things that I'm working on today are very similar to what I worked on in the Bureau with a little different perspective. And of course, one of the things that we're always looking at is how do we see around the corner? How do I anticipate the next risk and defining risk as a function of threat and vulnerability? And so one of the things towards the end of my tenure with the FBI was figuring out a way to leverage technology, and how do we leverage the available technologies to us so that we can enhance our security. And so for example, one example that I can think of as it relates to leveraging technology in the commercial real estate industry, we have credentials. We have access control credentials. We have the classic proximity card, right? These little cards here that as you enter a commercial building or any kind of office facility, you present it at the turnstile, and then that turnstile, if you are properly authorized, provides you access by communicating with an access control panel to see your profile and so forth and so on. So we know that these proximity cards are easily lost, but really, how is it that we can ensure a more secure sort of transaction at that turnstile, at that doorway? So we say turnstile, or it could even be your office suite inside, the 20th floor of a high-story commercial building. You go in and you present some kind of device to give you access as opposed to a key. We thought about moving towards, and we eventually did, to mobile credentialing. So the mobile credential, utilizing smartphone technology, utilizing Bluetooth technology, allows us to create a couple of benefits. One of which was it's a more secure transaction because it's using a private encrypted key that is completing the handshake as opposed to the proximity card. We're now using a cell phone, and the cell phone or that smartphone has an app in there that is functioning as that card. So in addition to using a more secure sort of form of transaction to communicate between the access control facility, the turnstile, and the access control panel on the back end, it makes it easier. And it's using Bluetooth technology. There's a risk associated with Bluetooth, but the actual time of communication between the smartphone and the Bluetooth reader in the turnstile is very minuscule. It's not constantly on because it turns off. It stops searching for the signal after the transaction is made. It's a minimal risk. But the convenient for the end user is this end user now has to carry that which they carry every day anyway, which is their smartphone, and not worry so much about the proximity card that they may lose in the street, think they forgot it at home, and then somebody in the street potentially can take that and exploit the access that it has because it hasn't been reported in time and it hasn't been shut off. So that's one of the ways, in its most simplest form, on how we in the organization and my team are looking at the technology and trying to find smart ways to increase our security posture. Um, Another example that comes to mind, which I think is relevant in our time of COVID. So prior to COVID, no one would have thought of scanning the temperature of individuals entering into the buildings. And so we're talking about security here, but a different form of security. We all know what the biggest concerns were during the onset of the pandemic. No one had an idea of what to expect in terms of building occupancy. Were people going to continue to come to work, not come to work? There was a little bit of a mix of both. Nevertheless, as an organization, the largest commercial real estate organization in New York City, we maintain 24/7 operations. Whether it was one person or 1,000 people coming in, we were up and running and ready to accept and welcome our guests. That being said, there were still these concerns, and we know one of the biggest data points that was utilized to determine whether or not an individual might be ill was their temperature. So how do we now address the idea of temperature taking without being really getting too close, right? Because people were concerned about their individual space. So here we are again asking the question, how do we, and this is one of the mantras that kind of governs our team, how do we use technology to increase our security? And so we went out in search of a process that can be done passively, non-invasively from a distance, and could have a decent amount of throughput that will be a lot better than walking up to an individual. And we all remember this with somebody with a handheld temperature device and they say, give me your forehead, and you'd walk up to it. And then it went from the forehead to the neck and from the neck to the wrist. And were we actually doing anything? Or were we just going through the motions? So the technology we were able to identify in which we adopted gave us the ability to, at a distance, scan more than, up to 100 people per minute, which was more than enough for us at the time, for anybody at the time, for that matter, here in New York City, at a distance with a plus or minus zero point 0.3 degrees, which is incredibly accurate. And we did this prior to New York State promulgating any new regulations, new regulation with regard to governing access into these commercial buildings. So we talked about the leveraging of the technology regarding mobile credentialing, in one respect, physical security, and in this respect, public health security. I guess we could define it that way, and how we leverage the technology to develop a process, implement a process that would cover at least one of the data points that was being utilized at the time to determine whether or not a person was ill and whether or not they should be granted access into a facility. And always keep in mind, and I like to make sure we're clear about this, we're not talking about elevated temperature. What we're speaking of, and nobody can give you an elevated temperature unless they actually put a thermometer in you. What we were talking about was an elevated skin temperature. That's what these technologies are actually reading. But that too is also an indication of what your internal temperature is running at as well.
Got it.
Ari,
Really fascinating. I
yeah,
know
you brought up something great.
step on.
You mentioned the term "see around the corner," right? And one of the things that I'm trying to encourage folks to do is integrate that physical and operational security with IT. And when you incorporate that mobile device, and we're getting resistance with that, right? And I'm curious, one of the things that I'm encouraging folks to do is, for example, very easily done with our platform, is when a user authenticates and accesses a door, let's say with their near field technology on their phone, we know that they're physically there and we can log that activity. And what we try to do is correlate that data with their authentication to their corporate network. Um, and one of the things that surprises me, and I'd love to understand why, is when we integrate that, right, we're adding multiple layers of authentication. So now we know that something they have, right, something that they are, if there's a biometric thing, something they know because it's a password. Now we know that they're physically there, and we could double authenticate their physical location, both from the IP address of the computer that they're sitting at and the physical location. Hey, I just checked into this card reader, at 123 Main Street at 1 p.m. and then I authenticated into my device. But what we're seeing is resistance from leadership, to allow us to integrate those two pieces of data. Can you give me some perspective as to how IT leaders can overcome some of that resistance that we're facing out there?
One of the things that I've encountered in this type of scenario are that the IT leaders really, if they don't understand it, their default is no, because it takes time and effort to learn about a new technology, to get to a point of comfort where they're willing to take that leap and adopt it. Unless they learn it for themselves, and unless they're convinced that what we are sharing with them, or the design or an added feature to their existing network, unless they're comfortable with it, the default is no. And then one of the things I think is a challenge for them is to take the time to learn it if they don't know it. Because learning something requires time. You have to be, number one, receptive to the possibility of change. Number two, you need to take time to read about it and speak with your peers to help you better understand it. So I think that's one problem. The other issue I think they're confronted with is the idea that they don't want anyone really touching their network. And so they don't understand that it doesn't replace the network, but it actually works with the network. And so I think that also is a piece of the resistance that exists when dealing and trying to convince somebody that this is an added layer of security. Many people, though, and this is the final point, uh, practically is pride. They think that they have it covered. They think they don't need any additional assistance. They've got two-factor authentication, and a third one is not needed. And so there's a lot of challenges in convincing someone. But I think the one thing that is best is being able to utilize some real case scenarios to explain and to identify and show like what the value is that we're bringing to the organization.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
yeah,
go
go ahead,
ahead.
Tom,
Sorry.
please. Yeah. I was just going to say, when we, one of the reasons that this piece of technology is so important to me is because it also adds another factor. Because usually SL Green, I think, is the largest, office landlord in New York City, and amazing properties. Um, but one of the factors that we add to that is also a human check. At most of your desks, there's a security guard there who might recognize an unfamiliar person, right? And so now when we add that piece with those additional factors of authentication, statistically, we are improving someone's security posture dramatically. And so, what we try to do is convince folks that yes, it's not as disruptive as it is, but I think you're spot on. I think change is what scares folks. Tom?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's the biggest challenge we have to confront is change is okay. Change is actually needed, especially when we look at the malicious cyber actors out there who are targeting your networks, whether it's a criminal organization or nation state player. Their tactics, their procedures are constantly evolving. So if we're not evolving with them, then we're going to be left way behind. But there's a combination of all those different elements we just mentioned that I think makes it a little bit difficult for them to adopt or really even be truly receptive to listen, to what's being spoken about.
Ari, what concerns you the most when you look at your field and how you apply technology to your field these days?
So the areas of concern that I'm always confronted with are based on what we've kind of already discussed, and it's to ensure the security and the safety of our personnel, our people, which is our most valuable asset, and then the physical component of that as well. And as much as I love the idea of leveraging technology to enhance security, leveraging technology to enhance security also poses some inherent risks associated with that. And so it's a double-edged sword. It it doesn't ride on its own, the idea of the technology being this sort of cure or this answer for everything. So the two areas that I would think of as we talk about concerns are cybersecurity, cyber concerns, and physical concerns. And in both instances, I want to be clear that for me, they are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they dovetail into each other. And so just as we use the example of the mobile credentialing, there is that inherent risk that we mentioned in that. There's a risk associated with the video surveillance systems that we utilize, right, to monitor not only active areas, but maybe more importantly, the inactive areas to see what's happening in the non-highly trafficked portions of facilities. And so the technology and the cyber, here we go, and physical, they all dovetail into each other. For example, if there's a hack into any one of our critical infrastructure systems. And for me, critical infrastructure is a different definition of what the term is commonly known in the industry. We're not talking about the electric grid, but we're talking about the critical infrastructure for a security operation in a commercial building, which is access control, video surveillance, visitor management, um, messenger centers, car parking facilities, things like that. If there's some kind of malicious cyber activity that impacts any one of those systems, it's going to be an impact to the overall security posture of my team or any security team to continue to operate and function in the manner that it's intended, which is to provide the protection to the people first and then to the physical aspects second. Then the next concern, and again, don't consider it separate from cyber, but rather tied in hand, is the physical security component. But in this particular topic area, I think I'll say it a little bit differently that with regard to the physical security, I'm talking about actual physical security, threats against people. And unfortunately, since the pandemic, we've seen an uptick in criminal activity, nationwide, not just in New York City. And we know that this type of risk of physical threat to individuals makes them a little hesitant of coming into the city, traveling on mass transportation. And so maybe that's also feeding into this slow return to the office work environment, in addition to the different concerns we have with regard to public safety. So I'm not here to debate why there's an increase in activity, other than to recognize that there is a increase in physical activity. And so one of the things we saw over the last year and a half are these mass demonstrations in the street. And, we see the news reports of all the sort of criminal activity taking place in retail locations. These are real threats out there that people are concerned about. So how do I organize the team's effort to be best prepared for when these events happen, right? Because we know preparation is always better than the cure. And so having a plan in place that's been tested, that's been coordinated primarily with our local law enforcement liaison so that they can help us see around the corner and say, we have a pop-up protest or a pop-up demonstration in your vicinity. If you have 5 exits, don't use these 4, use this 5th one to get your people, safely out of the building. So that robust external liaison that I used to do while I was in government remains outside. And so that takes us back to the very beginning on some of the lessons learned, how I continue to operate in that fashion again. And of course, random acts of violence. Random acts by definition are random. We don't know when or where. So those are probably the most difficult to predict. That being said, though, how do we prepare so that we can uh, be in a rather good positioned to respond accordingly and with the appropriate authorities throughout the city, throughout our sort of universe.
So what excites you? What about tech these days excites you? By the way, don't don't think that Michael and I think tech solves every problem, right? It's what the way we think about it, or at least the way that I think about it these days, Ari, is that technology is a foundation. It's not a strategy. It's not a solution. It just happens to be an effective way of doing things, and in some cases, a lot more effective than the ways we've had in the past. So to me, technology sits not on the strategy side, it sits on the execution side. It's the one of the alternatives you use to accomplish something. So when you see technology today, what excites you about it that says, finally, I'm seeing around a corner where tech might be able to help me do something I've wanted to do for a long time? And the thing is that before I go there, why don't you just tell everybody what you used to do before in the FBI before you, and if you can't tell, Ari is a lifelong New Yorker, went to college there, the whole routine. So and law school there, and the whole the whole story. So I don't
So
think, other than having a stint in Washington, you haven't been very far outside of that barrel, right? Have you?
no, I have it. So a little bit about my background, as you know, Tom, born and raised in New York City. And for those who are listening, if you're only listening and not watching, you'd certainly hear it in my accent, right? You just can't get rid of it, and that's okay. I love it. Yeah, it's who I am. But as a New York kid growing up in the city, this is my city. I fell in love with it. There was no better place to be than in New York City. And as I was going through college, I became a police officer. While after I graduated college and I started law school, I said, I really like this job in law enforcement, so I'm going to try and make it to the best of the best. And I applied for the FBI. And after some time, I finally got into the FBI. And I was fortunate enough as a first office agent, which is what we call the first assignment. When you finish the academy, I was able to get back to New York, where I really did the predominant majority of my career here in New York City, working out of the FBI's New York field office, which is considered the flagship office of the FBI, the largest office out there. As the New York office goes, so goes the rest of the bureau. And I was blessed to have a tremendous opportunity to work so many different programs in in the FBI. And in the first couple of years, I was able, don't know how as I look back, but I was able to successfully complete law school at New York Law School. Proud of that. And while I was working full time as an agent, which quite isn't easy, I think one of the things that helped was at the time I was neither married, didn't have a family, so there wasn't really much time for anything else. So I think that worked out well. And having worked a whole lot of different programs within the bureau, I finally ended my career as the special agent in charge. Well, I guess the two most significant towards the end of the career positions was working in headquarters as the special assistant to the executive assistant director for national security, which, as you would imagine, we responsible for all of counterterrorism, counterintelligence, the weapons of mass destructive directorate, terrorist screening center, and the high value interrogation group. So there was quite a bit on our plate at the time, mostly on his. I was there to help out as I could. And then from there, my last assignment was back to the New York office, where I had an opportunity to at first lead the special operations and cyber division. And then after a small restructure of the office, I ended up my career leading the counterintelligence and the cyber division. And for those of us who don't know what the counterintelligence actually means, it's kind of just chasing around the spies here and around New York City, and we have plenty of that kind of activity. So,
Which is the reason why New York City has the biggest FBI office, and the UN has a little bit to do with that.
absolutely, absolutely, those are some of the reasons why the resources are allocated here to the New York office. And I'll tell you, some of the things that I saw even towards the end of my career in dealing with the cyber piece of it and leading into the question that you ask in terms of what gets me excited about technology and its practical application in my universe, at least, I saw it back then, didn't understand it. I see it continuing today, still don't understand it, but I have a little bit of a better understanding, and that has to do with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And what do I mean? So when I think of artificial intelligence, I put it in the context of the video cameras that we utilize here to help us sort of monitor activity. But when we think about that and take it one step further, maybe pull the thread just a little bit more, I think about artificial intelligence, video camera systems, and then the technology or the software that sits on top of my video platform
Mhm.
to help me now identify certain behaviors that are high risk. And so this software, this artificial intelligence, which is then programmed so that it can continue to learn and we refine sort of those data points, will be able to tell me if a person is lingering in a particular location I consider to be a hotspot a little bit longer than they should. We'll be able to identify if somebody was walking with a bag, dropped a bag, walked away, and now it alerts me to there's an unattended bag in critical locations. Or in one particular instance, there's a certain access control mechanism that functions similar to like a magnetometer, but you never know it was doing that because it doesn't look anything like a magnetometer. And as we talked about throughput earlier with regard to the thermal scanning, this one actually can do like a thousand individuals in a minute as they walk through. And what it does in actuality is identifying any metallic objects that are on that person or hitting on that person that have a particular shape, to wit, a sharp edged instrument or a pistol. Now, doesn't mean it's 100% accurate, because on rainy days when they walk through with umbrellas, that red light's going off all day long. But for the most part, though, it gives us an opportunity to say this individual who is walking in a crowd of 100 is of interest and maybe should be looked at and adjudicated more personally. So as we establish the security process to allow for this kind of throughput to be non-invasive, but yet keeping that security in mind, we now have the ability in certain instances to identify somebody that may require a little bit more attention. And maybe now it becomes invasive because we're going to use one of those magnetic wands to scan the individual, much like you see at sports facilities. So artificial intelligence, I think, is absolutely tremendous. I mean, there's a few out there. That one for me stands out at the top of the list. But I love IoT and I love cybersecurity as well. I actually think cybersecurity is a trend. It's an emerging trend. And the reason it's an emerging trend is because, like any other technology, it evolves, it requires, especially given the threats that we're being confronted with, which are constantly new or modified versions of an old threat. The cybersecurity specialist, that technician, that expert, needs to constantly modify and evolve as well. And so that's always a trend. And it's always going to evolve, because I don't think there's going to be a moment where these malicious actors who've been able to develop business models to capitalize in one way, shape, or form, right? I don't think they're ever going to stop. So therefore, the cybersecurity expert who's tasked with the obligation and responsibility to ensure the security of their networks, that person is the personification of a cybersecurity trend, so long as they do what is needed to stay up on the current threats.
All right, back to your theme of, seeing around the corner here, and I mean that's really what you're getting at, right? It's the correlation of data across platforms. And one of the things that I like to preach really is thinking of IT and being more holistic. Um, how involved are your tenants and other departments in correlating this data? Are you trying to get leaders from, besides security, leaders from management, different pieces of management, to kind of help with different types of threats?
So I just as I thought in the government that there was a whole of government, and which evolved to a whole of nation, and which evolved to now a whole of globe approach in dealing with cybersecurity, I think within a private organization as well, it's absolutely critical that you have a whole of corporate sort of influence that is leading the effort. If the challenge is not being set by the top individual, that CEO, that president, that chairman, then the challenge is going to be it's going to be missed. We're not going to deliver on that challenge. So what I'm trying to say is that it requires a unified approach in dealing with cybersecurity. A little bit different, though, to your point with regard to the tenants. As an organization, we kind of look at things a little bit segmented. So the company itself has its own network, the building has its own network, and then the tenants have their own network, and they really don't intermingle, right? I don't want my corporate network on my building security program. Don't want it there,
Right. No, we
right?
should have air gaps. I agree, right? You want the air
Exactly.
gap between the financial system, the HR system. There's no reason for the HVAC and the elevator even to speak to each other, right? You know,
That's correct. Proper
yeah.
segmentation and true air gap. And I don't know that it's achievable, but that is certainly what we try for. And with regard to the tenants and what they do, it's almost my responsibility is the entirety of the building, in and around the building, from the basement to the top and its surrounding area. The tenant typically is responsible for that area behind their door, what they're paying for, right? And so it's almost like your home. I can put a I can put a doorman at the front of the building, but that doorman can only come up to your door. They can't actually walk in, right? They'll have to knock, or you have to give them authority or permission to go in there under certain limited circumstances. But we try to encourage throughout the universe of individuals, whether it's corporate, building specific, or our tenants, that cybersecurity is certainly something that should be taken seriously because it can have devastating impacts, and we've seen that, time and again.
So Ari, what do you think is going in the wrong direction from a technology point of view, or from the way people, human interaction or crime, or what do you think is going in the wrong direction?
Well, one of the things that I don't know if it's the wrong direction or not. I know that a lot of people, we're hearing a lot of conversations surrounding crypto. And I guess what I mean in that regard, which will lead to something that's important to us in the commercial real estate, and certainly for us as a company, is we know that the powerful computer systems that are being utilized to mine the crypto uses so much energy, and it has a carbon reaction. In fact, I want to say that I read an article a while ago that says all of the energy consumption for the crypto mining is equivalent to the use of all the refrigerators that are plugged in here in the United States. I mean, think about that. That has a tremendous impact in terms of the environment, and what's actually going on. So I don't know. Um, I'm not here to opine on the value of crypto, whether or not it's an asset. It's not an asset. I know there's people are doing it, and there's people in their mining farms throughout the world. I know certain governments are now making proclamations against crypto, whether it's regulation or it's not working out. And again, I'm not here to discuss
I
that.
think it's the fear of the unknown. But just to dive into kind of bringing it back, what you said was very interesting, right? We're burning this energy, right? All of the refrigerators in the country, to mine crypto. If we use that energy, right? Let's say to heat the building, you know, it would be more efficient. But we're thinking of things in vacuums, right? And that's where I see, where I struggle. What I'm trying to get folks to do is, hey, we got to talk more. We got to say, hey, yes, I can make money off of this little mining rig, right? And by the way, instead of heating your building with gas, because New York City just passed a mandate, right? Any building taller than 7 stories, or shorter than 7 stories can't use natural gas,
Right.
right? And now we're like competing factions, with each other.
So
Um,
notice he said we are competing factions, Ari. Ask
yeah,
him
yeah.
what he has in the basement of his building in New Jersey.
Mike, what do you have in the basement of your building in New Jersey?
You know, my son, my 14-year-old son now, manages a small crypto mining farm, that we put together, right? And it's been great. We enjoy doing it, and I'm
He's
using, and
proud of-
I'm heating the building with the exhaust. So instead of air conditioning it, we're taking cold air from the outside, bringing fresh air into this room. We're using it as a heat exchanger and putting that heat back into the building filtered to heat the building.
Yeah,
Well,
all right, that worked
I
great.
would
So,
encourage you to patent that process
yeah,
immediately.
exactly. We want the reverse too, though, Michael. We want the
Yeah.
summer timing. Heat exchange.
So listen, I love what you're doing because as a dad, you're engaged with your son on some type of entrepreneurial, idea, good or bad, successful or not, right? I think your son at the age of 14 doing what he's doing and he's doing it with his dad is amazing. And I would encourage that all day long. Again, I don't want to be misinterpreted. I'm actually parroting what I'm hearing, and I don't know this for a fact with regard to what the actual carbon emissions are with regard to all these crypto mining farms. I assume it's something, right? We know it's
Totally.
something. It's not nothing, but what the actual impact is to the environment, I don't know. But I know for us here at SL Green, we're concerned about what you're discussing. The environmental social governance is very important to us, and we're constantly looking at new and exciting things. So I know you asked the question of what's trending in the wrong direction, but like one of the other technologies that gets me excited is IoT devices.
Yeah.
We know that the IoT devices, right, are these little devices that transmit and receive real-time data, and they help to improve efficiencies. And we saw a lot of this in the manufacturing process to ensure real-time delivery of goods and services. Okay, great. Things that were historically dumb devices have now become smart devices, right? Because the cost of the sensors have gone down exponentially. And it's nothing to put a sensor on a light switch that senses movement to turn that light on when somebody walks in, and 30 seconds later, if there's no movement, it turns it off. It's nothing to put these temperature sensors in and around the building that says we haven't seen any activity in and around this area for any time. We need to go from 68 degrees down to 62 degrees where it's manageable and we're burning less fuel to hit an area that's not occupied. And so as an organization, we look to take advantage of these things, whether it's light sensors or thermostats or occupancy sensors, to, in this respect, see around the corner, see what's happening, and leverage that technology for the greater good of the environmental piece of it. And we have a tremendous team that is uniquely focused on that. I can't take any credit whatsoever, other than to say that I love to see them use the technologies they're using to really become effective in how we're burning how we're approaching our sort of carbon footprint.
So Ari,
I
I
just
know
hope
you
they,
have to you have to get
yeah,
out of here. So I know Michael wants to say something, but we got to get you ready to get out of here. I have
yeah,
one
yeah.
more question for you though. But Michael,
Sure.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I just hope they air gap that switch from the financial services system, right? Is the problem. Because they're
Yeah.
using the same piece of copper, right? It's the same physical network. And unfortunately, we see, especially lower middle market organizations, they don't have the resources to effectively create that segregation of the networks.
Agreed, and I guess it's one of those risks that they sort of adopt, right, and they take on.
So Ari, one of the things that is troubling a lot of people, and you mentioned this just earlier today, and I've seen a couple of articles in the New York press because I watch it, obviously, being at Columbia, is the hesitancy of people to come to New York because of the increase in street crime there. And two parts to this. One is what do you see going on in New York that gives you hope that that's going to get taken care of? And then secondly, how many more people like you are we seeing coming into the infrastructure in New York City that will just by definition help this problem over time? Is that a lucrative thing to do to come out of because you had a huge job at the Bureau to come out and do this in New York City? And are there other people like you doing the same thing in key positions that'll help us with solving some of these problems?
Uh, wow, really, two really good questions. What do I see in New York that is taking place right now that will help alleviate some of the concerns that the public is seeing in terms of coming in? Well, I think it all starts with the people, right? So the citizens of this great city are starting to speak up and have been and are speaking, I think, with a louder voice where they are demanding from their elected officials to take real action to stem this activity. There's a lot of political sort of challenges that are going on right now. Some of it has to do with some of the public positions that the New York County DA has taken in terms of how he is going to sort of his day one policies put out to his assistants with regard to prosecution of certain crimes. And we see how that had an immediate impact with our new police commissioner and the mayor, and they're already having discussions on that. And I think part of that is from the realization that, you know, we cannot pick and choose, I think, those crimes that are on the books that should be enforced. Years ago, there was a problem with selective enforcement of crimes, but now it seems that the New York County DA is taking a position doing exactly that, and there's some discussion that's taking place, and I'm grateful for the discussion that's taking place because it's needed and there needs to come a solution. But I think part of the catalyst for initiating that discussion is that the people of the city of New York are demanding that, especially when it comes to gun violence and the most recent tragic events with the New York City Police Department this past weekend, where one officer was shot and killed responding to a domestic incident, and the other officer remains in critical condition fighting for their life. These are the challenges that are being confronted. I think we have a great opportunity with this new administration, with Mayor Adams, to sort of take leadership on this topic, and he already has by implementing reinstituting one of the units designed for one of these plainclothes undercover units designed to target the guns that are on the street. So I think there are certain steps that are taking place. Uh, I don't like saying that I think it will take some time because this is one of those instances where you want rapid uh, turnaround because we're talking about the safety of the very people on which the city relies on to operate as a city. It's the impact to the tax base. It's nothing, again, all of these mutually, they dovetail into each other. They're not exclusive, and it has a collateral impact and a trickle down effect. It's cascading all over. But where does it start? I think one of the key points uh, and that you made that is valid is some of the concern of why we're not seeing a whole lot of people coming back. Some of the concern is related to the public safety of the city. But I can tell you, um, having come into the city every day since the onset of the pandemic, with the exception of a few days, but there really was never any work from home for me. You saw where we were, how we sort of went downhill, and we've leveled off down there. And I see some things that are giving me hope, like an increased police presence on the streets and the subways, that show me maybe we're turning the corner. So if you're traveling in and around New York City, you're definitely seeing the same things. We want results though. People are naturally impatient. They want it yesterday, not today, not tomorrow. They want it yesterday. But you know, it took us 2.5 years to get here. It might take us a little time to get back. How many people are similarly situated like me coming out of the government that may have some experience in the security field, be it cyber, physical, you know, insider threat of corporations? I think that is cyclical. Those are individuals that are, you know, running a certain clock, professional clock in their careers and trying to find that right opportunity that's a good fit for them, their skill set, and the organization they're potentially considering. But we have good, solid people, at least from my small universe of individuals and networked individuals. We have people that are coming out into the industry, certainly hitting some of the major organizations here in New York City as well. But you know, for all the reasons we just spoke about, they're not all coming to New York either.
Mhm.
They're taking positions elsewhere in Georgia, let's say, or in California, which has their own challenges. Every major urban city has a challenge in this day and age. But you know, some of the things that we're discussing are also some of the reasons that may be keeping some really highly qualified individuals away as well.
Well,
Tell us
I
a
have
little
to
about.
say, go ahead,
I
Michael.
was going to say, just tell us a little about some of the good news there. I know SL Green just opened up Summit One, and we'll give a little plug to that amazing
Well,
property. I'm going
I
to take you up on your
appreciate that.
offer to come see it. Just describe that for us, and let's encourage people to get back to the city. Tell us about Summit One.
So Summit One Vanderbilt is the hottest place to be in town. It is an absolute, it's a destination place. It is an experience. It is phenomenal. It's 3 floors at the top of the building that give you 360 view of New York City from a different perspective than you've ever seen. For example, one of my favorite viewpoints is the east side of the building where you're actually looking down on the Chrysler building. So that's a different perspective. Chrysler building, known globally, one of the iconic buildings of the New York City skyline, and to have an opportunity to sit above it and look down on it. I mean, every single view is incredible, but that view for me is the most incredible. But it's not just the views. They have a lot of different experiences within the summit that just create this feeling of being in a different universe, sort of transcending through the air, whether it's the levitation floor or any one of the other features that it has. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I look forward to the opportunity to host both of you here when the schedules permit. But hundreds of thousands of people literally came through our doors from the middle of October to the end of the year. That's how exciting it is. That's how bad the people want to come here. And that is a good indicator that New York City is back because our tourists are back. But we still have a long way to go, I think, and to make it that everybody wants to be coming back, and not just to the summit, but to experience everything around the summit, though, whether it's the restaurant, the plaza, having a cup of coffee. It's just a really great place to experience. But we have some work in front of us if we're going to have an honest conversation. And I think it's doable. We've been there before. We've done it before. It's a matter of committing ourselves and being willing to maintain flexibility and agility to adjust to whatever's being presented to us so that we can come back to being where we were before this pandemic started, like the greatest city on earth. We don't
So
want
the
to be
summit
anywhere else.
Summit One sounds, Michael, like a step up from my lowly classroom in Hamilton Hall at Columbia University, where I want to have you come, Ari, for one of our master's degree classes this summer. We'll have you come and talk the story. But I think that one of the things I think people aren't realizing is the sophistication of the technology that's being applied in all different areas, and specifically real estate, is really exciting. We Michael and I talk a lot about it because of cyber, but all the different things you're working on. So it's been really exciting. I know you have a hard stop. I know we have to let you go, but it's been great to see you, pal. And hopefully I'll see you in person. And you've been great to keep checking on me all of this time. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Michael, again for having me here. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one thing that I think is key to dealing with the cybersecurity, at least, endeavor, this sort of piece that we're focusing on, which undoubtedly is probably the most significant issue we can discuss from a security perspective, and that's public-private collaboration. There is no one person, one entity, one organization, one government that can do this alone. And one of the things I struggled with, but made every effort to be successful at while I was still in the government, was to encourage public-private collaboration. Because each side of the equation there, each side of that coin has critical information that's necessary to posture ourselves successfully, not only for prevention, but for the inevitable when it actually happens, the bad act, for the recovery, right? So for the remediation piece of it too. But that public-private collaboration has to include information that is valuable to both sides. And the government likes to many times say, well, we can't share that information with you because it's in a classified nature. Well, the government needs to do a better job. And hopefully I did while I was there within the confines and the constructs that I was governed by. But the government needs to do a better job in providing real actionable intelligence to the organization so that they can do their job and protect themselves. And the converse of that is the private sector really needs to understand that, at least for the investigators, for an organization like the FBI, they're investigators, not regulators. And so we're not here to get you in trouble, but rather help you, right? And figure out what it was, what that vulnerability was that was exploited so that you can be better educated in figuring out how to plug that gap. But again, for me, the issue is no different than what I did in the government. What I'm doing here is this public-private collaboration piece that is going to be critical for the ultimate success of addressing what is an issue, which unfortunately I don't think is going to go away, and that's one of cybersecurity. So with that, Tom, again, thank you. I look forward to seeing you in your summer class. And Michael, as always, a pleasure to see you, and really thank you for the opportunity to have this little reunion here with you guys. I really enjoyed it.
It was great
Thanks,
fun,
Ari.
buddy.
Yeah.
Great fun.
And if please check out Summit One, the website there.
Yes.
Just Google it. And if you want to learn more about CTM, just Google my name or Tom Cowan's name and CTM, and it'll take you right to the CTM webpage. Thank you both. Look
All
forward to
right,
it.
guys. See you
Thank
later.
you. Take care.